So let's get started. If you could you sit over here somewhere? Thank you. So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Today we're going to be asking the question, does God exist? Okay. So I'd like to begin with a prayer first. So please join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful but icy day that you have given us, that we could all gather together and learn deeper things about your truth and your vision for mankind. Today, we're going to be looking at the question, does God exist? And we'll see that this is a deeply profound and very important question throughout this entire presentation. I pray that you can work in each and every one of us, each of the souls that are gathered here today. We know that you have a mission for each and every one of us, that when aligned with your purpose, you can use us for the betterment of the world and for the establishment of your kingdom. Thank you, Father. I pray that you could bless this day, and I offer all the praise, glory, and honor in your name, and in the name of three kingships. I pray. Amen and Aju. Aju. Yes. So today we're going to be looking at the question, does God exist? Right? And notice that this is not a question on whether Christianity is true or unification thought is true. I want you to see that difference, okay? So this is a purely philosophical and scientific question. It's not a question of whether a particular set of religious beliefs are true, okay? So, before I go on, I want to preface that you can ask a question anytime during this presentation, whether it be a objection or clarifying question or a comment, that's fine too. But if you want to ask anonymously, you can scan that QR code over there, and it'll take you to a question asking site, okay? But you have to make sure that you press the anonymous button, or else you're gonna reveal yourself, okay? So you have to make sure that you press the anonymous button. So I'll just give you a second to scan that QR code over there. So please feel free. Okay, is everyone good? I think everyone is good. Okay, with that being said, let's get started. But before I ask this question, does God exist? I want to first ask the question, why is this question even important at all, right? I don't care if God exists or not, right? Why should I care if, right? It's an if, right? That's what we're going to look at today. If God exists or not. Well, I think the question, does God exist or not, is incredibly important. And here's why. From you and I to the highest level philosophers who contemplate on the nature of reality, there are 5 main questions that people ask. These are called the 5 big questions, right? So what are these questions? They are questions such as origin. Where do I come from? Identity. Who am I in this world? Meaning, why am I here? And then morality. How should I live or orient my life? And finally, destiny. Where am I going and what is my end goal? Okay, but you may ask, so what? But so what, right? What does that have to do with God? That's a great question. Well, it's incredibly important because the question of whether God exists or not has tremendous impact on the major questions of life. In fact, the question, does God exist or not, may be the most important question, right? And you'll see this throughout the resulting slides. Let's see. Come on. There we go. So origin, again, that is, where do we come from? Where do we stem from? So did nothing create everything? Or is there something or someone that has created us? Identity, again, who am I? If there's a creator who has created me, doesn't that have tremendous impact on who I am or implications, right? Meaning, why am I here? Am I just a cosmic accident? Or was there and is there a purpose to my existence? Next, morality. How should I live? Or how should I orient my life? Why should I abide to a set of moral principles? How should I orient my life again? The question of whether God exists or not affects that also, right? And finally, destiny. Again, where are we going? Where am I going? What is my destiny or end goal, or in Greek, telos, right? What am I moving towards? So, as you can see, the question of whether God exists or not is incredibly important to answer all of life's biggest questions. Again, origin, identity, morality, meaning, and destiny. And all worldviews must have an answer for these types of the big questions of life, right? And even atheism has answers to these kinds of big questions. This is why we ask, is there evidence to suggest that God exists? So this is a brief overview right here. First, we're going to argue that the universe began to exist. And we're going to take a look at this by proving, first philosophically, and then scientifically, that shows that the universe came into being from nothing. And then we're going to extrapolate that and say, what could cause a universe to begin to exist? This is a fascinating argument. Secondly, we're going to take a look at the fine-tuning argument and argue, given the fine-tuned nature of the universe, there must be a fine-tuner. Okay? And finally, we're going to take a look at the moral argument, arguing that since there's a objective foundation for morality, there must be a moral lawgiver. So we'll take a look at all these three arguments here. But before I go on, I just want to preface that this is a very introductory path into Christian apologetics. And this is not even getting to Christianity, right? This is just generic theism that we're trying to get to today. I want to emphasize that one more time. So, this is just like the top of the iceberg, so to speak, where like 10% of the iceberg is shown on top of the water where you can see it, but 95% still remains submerged underwater. So this is a very introductory presentation. And each of these arguments go on for years and years, and books upon scholarly articles upon articles. So this is, again, an introductory lecture. But, oh yes.
So what is an argument?
Well, an argument just means to prove something, right? You can, I don't know, like say you're having like an argument on whether the clock should be there or not, right? Clock should be there. You would give sound reasons on why the clock should be there, and you would look at the other side too, right, on why it should not be there. So if I understand it correctly, your question, it's just trying to prove something, right? Yeah. Yeah, but let's keep going. Thank you for the question. So as I was saying, these three arguments, although independent, right, they stand alone. When combined, you'll see the power and strength of these three arguments. So with that being said, let's go on. The first argument, again, that is the universe began to exist. First, we're going to argue this by proving that an infinite number of past events is impossible. Okay? So that's a philosophical argument on why the universe began to exist. Okay? Secondly, we're going to take a look at a scientific argument, the expansion of the universe. Third, we're going to take a look at the second law of thermodynamics, and that's also a scientific proof, obviously, that proves that the universe began to exist. Okay? So before I go on, I want to clarify that what is the opposite of a universe beginning to exist? Is there any, thoughts? Any thoughts? What? Ceasing to exist. Yeah, it would be eternal, right? That would be the opposite, right? Is that what you're trying to get at? Right. It would be eternal, right? That would be the opposite of the universe beginning to exist, right? What would be another option? There's no other option, right? It's the law of non-contradiction, right? Either the universe is eternal or it began to exist. Does that make sense? I'm guessing that's a yes. Yes. So we're going to take a look at this notion that the universe began to exist. So let's get started. Again, an infinite number of past events is impossible. So let's get to a philosophical reason. This is because if the universe has always existed, then that would mean that there is an infinite series of events before today. Okay, I'll give you an illustration after this, okay? But if that's the case, if there's an infinite number of past events before today, that means that this present moment could not have been reached. But here we are, right? We are here in this space listening to this presentation. So let's look at an illustration on what I mean by this. So imagine you have a timeline like this. So you have the first written language, the pyramids, King David, and all these other events, okay? So Alexander the Great, Christ being crucified, Charlemagne being crowned, and George Washington, et cetera, et cetera. And there's millions upon millions of more events in between, right? Does this make sense? So there's a timeline. And that red dot represents now, where we are right now, right? Where we are listening to this presentation. So this is the timeline that we can try to understand this concept of an infinite number of past events is not possible. Okay, so up until now, notice that there is a limited number of events before today. Does that make sense? There is a limited number of past events, right? So because we assume that there is a limited number of past events, that's why today is possible. But if there is an endless amount of events before today, that means we cannot arrive on today. What I am saying is it's like a ray, right? And I'm sure you've studied this in, I don't know where you study it, middle school, I guess, middle school math. Where if you have a line, right, if you have a line, there's 2 points. And if there's 2 points that are closed, that's a line segment, right? But if it's open and it goes on infinite to one direction, that is what we call a ray, right? So if it goes on forever, let's go on to the next slide. There's an infinite number of events before today. This makes sense, right? And there is nowhere to pick to start, because wherever you pick, let's say you pick here, okay? Let's say you pick right here. There's going to be an event preceding that. Does that make sense? Yes, okay. So wherever you pick to start, let's say you even pick like here, okay? Since it goes on forever, there's still going to be events preceding that, right? Does that make sense? So that means that whatever begins the chain of events cannot start at any point, right? So today cannot be reached. But obviously, here we are, right? So that would prove philosophically that the universe began to exist. This is, I tried to buy some dominoes to illustrate this, but the Walmart or the Dollar General, sorry, the Dollar General didn't have it. So I'm sorry I couldn't really do an illustration, physical illustration. But I think this concept, you can try to wrap your head around this. But to say it another way, to give a domino analogy, the final domino is today, okay? But if there's an infinite number of dominoes before today, that means there's nowhere to pick to start the chain of dominoes. Does that make sense? There's nowhere to pick to start. Only if you have a line segment or something that is closed where it starts off this chain of dominoes, that's the only way today is possible. Okay, so this is the first proof that the universe began to exist, philosophically. Let's take a look at a scientific argument. The universe is expanding. So scientists, beginning with Edwin Hubble, observed that the light coming from distant galaxies is redder than expected. It's red, okay? It's red. That means that the galaxies moving away from us is making it so the light is stretched. That's why it's red, right? I'm sure you studied that light is like a spectrum, right? And you have red on one side, and then you have, I don't know, blue, I think, right? Blue on the other. And then from this side, the wavelengths are very narrow and tight. It's like a squiggly, right? But once you get closer to the other side, it's more like a wave, right? Where they are more stretched, right? So that would be best explained by the universe's moving away from us. Does that make sense? So if you were to rewind the tape, so to speak, that means that the universe, everything, will collapse down into an initial point. Does this make sense? Yes, okay. Yes, and I have an illustration to really capture this. So this example was not mine. It's a person named Stephen Meyer. He's a philosopher and a scientist that came up with this example. And so I have a balloon here, right? And I'm not sure if you can see it from afar, but I have all these black dots on this balloon. Can't see, okay. I have all these black dots on the balloon. And the black dots represent like galaxies or planets or stars and stuff, right? So right now the balloon is represented by the universe, okay? So when I blow this balloon, it is going to be the state in which it is today, where everything is expanded, right? So as I blow this balloon, right? So this is what we are at now, right now in 2024, okay? But if we were to shrink down the balloon or rewind time, so to speak, it will all collapse down into an initial point, right? I know the balloon still has form and, but imagine that it collapses all down into a single point, okay? So this balloon illustrates this scientific argument that the universe is expanding. Therefore, if we shrink back time, it will all come to an initial point. And that proves that the universe began to exist, does it not? Right? So this is the second scientific argument on why the universe began to exist. Okay? So let's go on to the second scientific proof that the universe began to exist. Again, that is the second law of thermodynamics. What does this state? This states that unless energy is being fed into a system, that system will become increasingly disorderly. And what do I mean by this, right? It's confusing. So I have a candle right here, right? Make sure I don't fall off the stage. I have the candle right here. So the wax that you see underneath the candle is made up of certain chemicals. Does that make sense? I don't know what kind of chemicals. I'm sure chemists could tell you more detailed. But it's made up of certain chemicals that burn, right? It's meant to burn for a long time. That's its purpose, right? So after a couple of hours, this candle that you see here will completely melt, right? Right. Yeah, it will completely melt unless more wax or chemical is added onto that. Does that make sense? So in this example, unless more wax is being fed into the system of the candle will become increasingly disorderly or melt and die, I guess. So this candle is an example of the second law, right? Things naturally tend toward disorder or increased entropy as physicists call it, right? So similarly, think of the candle analogy, okay? So similarly, given enough time, all of the energy in the universe will eventually spread out evenly throughout the universe. And this is called the heat death of the universe, okay? I'm sure you've seen scientific sci-fi movies that there's nothing, right? There's nothing. There's only bitter cold darkness in the universe. And yeah, all life is dead, basically, right? So the heat death of the universe. Sorry. Yes, the mic, yes. Yeah, so I'm sure you've seen movies like that. So this is what will happen something like billions of years from now, okay? This is what will happen eventually. It will leave the entire universe without heat, just as the candle analogy. But in this case, it's the universe, right? So, but this question, this fact raises a further question. If given enough time, the universe will eventually be in a state of heat death, then why is the universe not now in a state of heat death if it has existed forever? Does this make sense? So I give an analogy through the sun, okay? So the sun has something like 4.5 billion years from now, it will die. It will cease to give out heat, and then it will be a, like a dead planet, basically. So, taking the sun as an example, I know the sun began to exist like a couple billion years ago, but let's say the sun, for this example, let's say that it began to exist from the beginning of the universe, okay? And we know that the sun has a limited number of life, right? It's like the candle where it eventually burns out. Does that make sense? So if it began to exist at the very beginning of the universe, that would mean that before we arrived to today, it should have already burned out by now. Does this make sense? I want to make sure that people get what I'm trying to say. Is there any questions or people who didn't understand? No questions. Okay. Yeah, so if I say it a different way, like the sun has a limited number of time, right? It has a time limit, basically. It has a time limit. It's on a ticking time bomb, okay? It's on a ticking time bomb. Eventually, it will burn out. But the other claim of the universe beginning to exist is the claim the universe is eternal, right? Does that make sense? It's eternal. That's the other side of the claim, right? But if it is eternal, that would mean that the sun, or the universe in this case, should have already been in a state of heat death, right? Does this make sense? Okay, yes. Okay, so through the sun, we can understand that according to the second law of thermodynamics, the universe had to have a beginning. So that is the second scientific proof that proves, that evidences, that indicates that the universe began to exist. Okay, so this is the fun part. This is why we even did this extrapolation, right? So we have looked at 3 different reasons on why the universe is not eternal or began to exist. Remember, first we proved philosophically that it has to begin to exist, right? And then we looked at two other scientific arguments, right? First, the expansion of the universe through the balloon thing that you remember, right? And then the second law, right? The SLT, if we put it short. So, this is the question. If the universe began to exist, what is the logical question that follows? Is there any hands? Any thoughts? Okay, yes. Yes, Mr. Richard.
What caused it to begin?
Right. That is the question, right? That is the logical question that follows, right? If the universe began to exist, what could cause a universe to begin to exist? Does this make sense? It follows through, right? That's the logical question that pops up. So, I know that looks like Ukraine flag. I did not intend it to be that way. So what would this thing have to be? What would these attributes be in order to begin a universe from nothing? Well, this thing would have to be, number one, spaceless. Why? Because the universe expanded out into everything, right? But if we go back into time, there was no such thing as space. Does that make sense? And this is the Big Bang Theory, right? It's the most prominent theory in scientific literature today. And brilliant physicists and scientists hold to this theory, like Stephen Hawking or Roger Penrose and many others, right? Many others. So it has to be something that is spaceless. Come on. Okay. Next, it has to be something that is timeless or something that transcends time. Because an infinite number of past events, the first philosophical argument, remember, an infinite number of past events is not possible, right? So it has to be something that transcends time. Next, clicker is weird. Next, it would have to be something that is immaterial, because matter is what came into being, right? Next, it would have to be uncaused or necessary to exist. Because if something is eternal, that means it does not have a beginning. Does that make sense? So it has to be something that is uncaused. Next, it has to be powerful to create the universe from nothing, right? It went from a state of nothing into something. Something changed. Something changed. And finally, and most critically, it must be something that is personal. Why? Why? Because to go from a state of nothing into something, right? There was a change that took place, right? There's something different. To go from a state of nothing into something. Something changed. Something changed, right? And without something having causal power, that means agency or free will, freedom of the will, no changes can be made. For example, let's say you have an eternal ice cube, and it's in a state of perpetual frozenness or ice cubeness. That's not a word, but it's in a state of perpetual frozenness, I guess. So if nothing happens, right? If nothing happens, it will still keep on being that ice cube, that same ice cube forever, right? But let's say an agent comes, right? An agent or someone who has free will or agency and cranks up the heat. Now that ice cube will start to melt, right? And become a puddle of water, right? So notice, to go from a state of perpetual ice cubeness into something else, there needed to be some kind of action that took place in the middle. Does that make sense? Similarly, to go from a state of nothing into something, right? If no agency is in the middle, then it will stay in a perpetual state of nothingness. Does this make sense? Yes, okay. But if there's a choice that was made, that would mean that would explain why there is something, right? We are standing in this room and in this vastly incomprehensibly large universe, right? So this thing would have to be spaceless, number one, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, or eternal, or another way, necessary. Powerful enough to create the universe from nothing, and it would have to be personal. It would have to be endowed with freedom of the will. So, what kind of thing fits in that, right? What kind of thing fits into this criteria? Like numbers, for example, or mathematics or logic. That is also spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and uncaused, right? It's eternal. But is it powerful? It can't create anything, right? Does that make sense? And further, it's not personal. It can't think of anything. Can't say, oh, I am the number 3 or something like that. So only something like an immaterial mind that transcends both space and time fits into this kind of criteria. Does this make sense? Yes, I'm guessing that's a yes, yes. So that would be the first argument to prove, to evidence that God exists, right? Because what other thing fits into this criteria? What is something that is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, powerful enough to create the universe from nothing, and personal? There's no other thing, right? So this would be the first argument. This is called the Kalam cosmological argument. And there's many brilliant thinkers arguing for this, right? And this, although not being the complete framework of classical theism or traditional theism, as we can say it another way, this proves that God has these certain, only God can fit into this kind of criteria, right? It has all the attributes that we traditionally attribute to God, except omniscience or omnibenevolence, right? Does that make sense? Only an immaterial mind that transcends both time and space fits into this kind of criteria. So this is the first argument for God's existence. Is there any questions or comments upon this argument? Okay, let's go on. Second, the fine-tuning argument. Okay, so in order to understand what the fine-tuning argument is, you have to understand what the what fine-tuning is. Does that make sense? You have to understand that, right? You have to understand the term, right? So, what is fine-tuning? And I'll give a very technical definition that two brilliant people have stated. But I want to emphasize that there's going to be an example that illustrates what fine-tuning is, okay? So please hang on tight. So fine-tuning, these two gentlemen say, these two handsome gentlemen say, fine-tuning refers to the contrast between a wide range of possibilities and a narrow range of a particular outcome or phenomenon. That didn't make sense, right? So what does that mean, right? So they give an analogy. And if you want to see the credentials, you can see it there. But they give an analogy. So, man, let's say you are making a beautiful cake. It has even sparkles on it. So to get a very beautiful cake, you need highly specific ingredients, right? And even with these ingredients, you need the exact amount of ingredients. Does this make sense? Okay, so you need each individual ingredient, but not only that, you need each individual ingredient needs to be the specific amount, right? So, and also, it's not only that, right? It's also the perfect combination of all of these ingredients that you get a very beautiful cake, okay? So, let's say that let's say that you tripled the amount of flour, right? What if you tripled the amount of flour that you put on the cake. It's no longer beautiful. There's no more sparkles on it, right? So it would be a failed cake now. And I know the suggestion that I should put flour on there, but I couldn't find that image, but that's for another time. But it would be a failed cake, right? Does this make sense? Because it needs to be the specific amount of each ingredient, and it needs to be all combined into a particular goal, right? To produce a very delicious and beautiful cake. So, this cake is a great example of fine-tuning. If we say it a different way, the way that we can recognize the cake is finely tuned is because, number one, it is contingent. And what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? Contingency just means that it didn't have to be that way. It could have been something else. It wasn't necessary that this was the only possible option. Does this make sense? So it has to be, number one, contingent. Secondly, it must be complex. Each individual ingredient of the cake is very complex, right? And it's not just the individual ingredients, it's the specific amount of each ingredient. Further, it must be specific. You must have a specific buildup or a specific purpose for its existence. In this case, the cake is delicious and it makes us happy, I guess. But this is how we can recognize fine-tuning in the universe. Anywhere, any example, like a chair or a speaker or a particularly shaped snow, like a snowman or something. This is how we recognize fine-tuning in the universe. That's something, an agent has intervened and created something, right? Case in point, another example, a watch. And this is the famous traditional example of fine-tuning. It was by William Paley. He's an Anglican philosopher. And he argued that why can you know that a watch is finely tuned, right? A watch. Why is it finely tuned? Because let's say you are walking through the forest, okay? You're walking through the forest and you see a rock. You don't think much of the rock, right? It's just a rock. And you don't automatically assume that it is finely tuned. But let's say you're walking through the forest and you see a watch on the ground, okay? You would immediately think that someone dropped the watch or, I don't know, someone left it there. In other words, someone has finely tuned this watch. Why? Why can you recognize this? Because number one, the watch didn't have to be that watch, right? It's contingent upon an agent doing something to make this kind of watch, right? Further, it's very complex. You need each individual gear matching up in the perfect way in order to, turn the dial. It has the stop button too. So it's very complex. It cannot happen naturally in nature. So further, it has to be specific. It is very specific. It has a highly specified goal or purpose for its existence. Does this make sense? So the way you can recognize fine-tuning is, number one, that it is contingent, or it didn't have to be that way. Excuse me. Second, it's very complex. It is highly intricate in its design. Third, it is very specific. It has a specific goal and a specific build-up for its existence. Okay? So this is how you recognize fine-tuning anywhere in the universe. Whether you see, again, like a particularly shaped rock or a snow or chairs or pianos and stuff. So number one, it is contingent, complex, and specific. Okay? In the same way, the fundamental forces of the universe, life itself, and all of the things that allow for life, like energy, usable energy, or chemistry, these are all highly specific and complex laws of the universe. And you'll see this through a video. And they are all so finely tuned to a narrow life-permitting range that it is not explainable by other means, okay? So what I mean by this is, let's go to a video. Let's go macrocosmic and look at a few examples within this video. Fine-tuning. Hopefully that'll play. Yes, it will play. Hallelujah. Okay.
Razor's Edge.
Okay. So as you've seen in the video, all these constant quantities, and he only gave 3 examples, right? But there is dozens upon dozens more, right? As you go on to the video, there's even more examples, okay? So you can watch the video in its entirety if you want. But this is not just the ramblings of Christians who took over science or something. It goes across all spectrums, whether it be atheist, agnostic, Buddhist, Muslim, or even Christian, obviously, right? Everyone, all the physicists recognize that the universe is finely tuned. As Stephen Hawking states, oh, shoot, sorry. The odds against a universe like ours emerging out of something like the Big Bang are enormous. The fine-tuning of the universe is like the appearance of a well-ordered library in which thousands upon thousands of encyclopedias are scattered about randomly, but somehow being in perfect order and all of them being perfectly aligned in the right way, even though there's no apparent cause for that order. Also, 2 other brilliant physicists, and these are the 2 gentlemen that you saw earlier, those 2 guys down here, right? You saw them, Geraint Lewis and Luke Barnes. They say small changes in the free parameters of the laws of nature as we know them have dramatic, uncompensated, and detrimental effects on the ability of the universe to support the complexity needed for physical life forms. And this book is actually a great book illustrating this. There are two brilliant physicists from, I think, Sydney University, and they hold a class there. I couldn't understand major portions of the book because it goes very deep. It goes into like all the different ways the universe could have been. Like an atom could have weighed a little more, or and ceasing to permit a life permitting universe. And they go into like matter and like even space-time. They go into biology. They go into all these examples and show that it is the scientific consensus that we live in a finely tuned universe. Okay? And another well-known and brilliant physicist, Freeman Dyson, states, "The more I examine the universe and study the details of its architecture, the more evidence I find that the universe, in some sense, must have known we were coming." So, what could explain this fascinating fact of fine-tuning? Okay? Well, there's three options. Number one, it's called physical necessity by another name. But was this universe necessary? Did all the numbers have to be that way? Was there no other possible combination or explanation for the universe being this very way? Did it have to be that way? Was there no other option? Okay, so that's the first option. Secondly, did we just get really, 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 really lucky? So it's chance, right? It's basically stating that we won the cosmic lottery. And remember that just like the cake example, it's specified complexity, right? So what I mean by that, again, is each individual ingredient needs to be an exact amount, okay? And each of them have to fit together in a perfect way in order to allow for a life-permitting universe, right? Just like the cake, just like the cake. Think of the cake when I mean by a specified complexity. Third, are we here by design? Was there someone or something that was rigging the odds in a certain way that allowed for a incomprehensibly improbable chance that we are here in this life-permitting universe? So three options, right? Physical necessity, chance, or design. Let's take a look at the first one. Was this universe necessary? According to this view, the constants have to be what they are now, okay? This view states that all of the constants and quantities could not have been any other way. It had to be this way. There was no other option. There was no possible universe in which there could not have been a life-permitting universe. Does this make sense? So that's the first option. Problem. There is no evidence to support this. There's nothing in physics to show that the universe had to be this way. In fact, the book that was here, The Fortunate Universe, goes into dozens upon dozens of examples. The universe could have been different. Okay? So there's nothing to show that the universe had to be what they are now. What it is now, sorry. What it is now. So physical necessity is not plausible. Or how about chance? How about chance? According to this view, all of the constants and quantities fall into the infinitesimal life-permitting range. And we basically lucked out. We lucked out in this universe. In this view, we had basically won the cosmic lottery. Okay? So we got really, really lucky. But we can show that this is unreasonable by way of an analogy. And, okay, yeah, I'll say that later. But yeah, so let's say you're playing a game of poker with one other person. And say you bet like a $10,000 on the line to raise the stakes a little bit. Okay? But let's say that he's dealing the cards, okay? He's dealing the cards. And let's say you get a very bad hand, but he gets a royal flush. And to those who don't play poker, a royal flush is like the highest thing that you can get, right? There's all these different sets, like a full house, I think, a pair, or three of a kind, or something like that. But the royal flush basically beats any other set of cards. So it's the ultimate trump card. So say he gets this, and in context, oh, shoot. Wrong button. In context, the odds of getting the royal flush is 1 in 650,000. Okay? So it's very unlikely. And even those who have played poker, I'm not sure if you have gotten a royal flush ever. So it's very unlikely that you get this, right? But you convince yourself that this guy's not cheating, okay? You convince yourself that because this hand you're just as likely to get this hand rather than this hand, you just convince yourself and say that this guy is not cheating. Does that make sense? Because this hand is actually also 1 in 650,000. Does that make sense? Both are 1 in 650,000, right? Both have the highly improbable nature, okay? But what happens if he gets another royal flush? Now it's getting suspicious. 2 times in a row, right? What are the chances of him getting a royal flush 2 times in a row, the highest trump card, right? So something's awry. But although you start to suspect something, you're willing to keep on playing. But despite the odds, if he gets it again and again and again and again and again, you would be firmly convinced that this guy is now cheating, right? It's actually reasonable to infer that this guy is cheating. Does that make sense? It's not just a unreasonable hypothesis, right? This is actually the reasonable hypothesis that this guy is cheating. He's rigging the odds in a certain way to ensure that his hand gets the best hand, right? The royal flush. Does everybody understand what I'm trying to say here? Yes. Okay, great. So, and if he gets it again and again, he steals all your money. So now you'll be ready to attack him. You'll be leaping upon him or shooting him. I don't know. But I love this photo. It really illustrates what you would try to do if he stole all your money. But why, right? We ask the question, why? Why? Why do you suspect him of cheating? Why is it reasonable to conclude that the man has cheated? Or shall we say, fine-tuned his hand? Why? Why? Is there any thoughts?
Because it's most likely by design.
Right. Yeah, that is the most reasonable hypothesis, right? It is the most likely, what did you say, probability or something?
It's most likely that it's by design.
Right, it's most likely by design. That's what he said. Yes. Right. Just like the cake, right, that's exactly right? It's most likely by design. He has fine-tuned his hand. Just like the cake, it is specified complexity. Does that make sense? It's not just complex, it is specific because he has gotten this again and again. And in context in poker, that is the highest cards that you can get, right? So it's because it's an instance of specified complexity, that is why we can say that he has fine-tuned his hand. That would be the most reasonable explanation, given all the different odds. So the analogy is this. If something happens with specified complexity, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, or it's contingent, right? A contingent. Or it didn't It wasn't necessary that it was that way. Does that make sense? If it is contingent, then the reasonable inference is to wonder if there is intentional fine-tuning or intelligence rigging the odds in a certain way to ensure that he gets the best of the best. Does that make sense? That is actually a reasonable inference. Okay, yes. I thought you were walking up on the stage.
Oh, no.
Yes.
I have a question.
Oh, okay, yes.
For some younger members in the audience, they don't quite understand.
I think, yes. So you'll see in the next slides. So, again, an instance of specified complexity, the reasonable inference is to think that there is intentional fine-tuning of the odds. That makes sense, right? You start to wonder if it's just coincidence or destiny. It had to be that way. But compared to the royal flush, getting the royal flush 5 times, the chances of the universe being life-permitting is tremendously more improbable than getting a royal flush 5 times. Remember, it's like 10 to the 80th power. And it's not just that, it's multiple of those. And one of the constants that you saw was, I think it was like the mass of the proton, or mass and energy of the proton. That is like 10 to the power of 123. And that is a number that all of our supercomputers in the world cannot input that number in its databases. It's that big of a number. And it's not just that one instance, right? It is all these different numbers that had to exactly match, but not only, just like the cake, right? It's not just these individual ingredients. It's obviously the individual ingredients are itself complex, but it is the perfect combination of all of these ingredients too that makes a cake, right? You remember the cake example, right? Yes. So the chances of the universe being life-permitting is tremendously more improbable. So therefore, just like the inference of the royal flush example, the logical inference is to believe that chance is not at all plausible. It would be akin to getting the royal flush, like, I don't know the exact numbers, but like 250 times in a row, and you would still believe that's chance. No one would infer that, right? No one would believe that. So we move on to the only possible option, design. The intricate design at the very foundations of our universe point to an intelligent designer, a super intellect. So given the fine-tuned nature of the universe, we infer a fine-tuner. That is the reasonable inference, right? Just like the royal flush. Does this make sense? It's not just like Christians taking over science, or deists taking over science and using that for their own desert-dwelling theology or something. That is actually the reasonable inference. That makes sense, right? Yes. Okay, great. So this is the fine-tuning argument. And this is the second argument for God's existence that we will cover today. Let's go on to the next one. Third, the moral argument. So everyone knows right or wrong intuitively. Since the dawn of history, morality has governed all nations, right? Whether it be Middle East or the Americas or Korea or Africa or something like that. For example, we know that helping your neighbor is better than to eat your neighbor, right? However, is there something objectively wrong about certain behaviors? If there is, then what could be the foundation for this universal principle? So, there's a lot of misconceptions of what the moral argument is, okay? So I want to first get into what the moral argument is not. So, first, the moral argument is not saying that atheists cannot be moral people. It is not saying that, okay? It's not, okay? Obviously, there are moral atheists, okay? So it's not saying that, okay? Second, the question is not if we can recognize moral values without belief in God. So this is the most frequent objection. Like, people say, I can recognize whether something is right or wrong without belief in God, right? But that's not what we're saying. And what are we saying then, right? We'll get to that very soon. But next, the question is not if someone can create a system of ethics without reference to God. That's similar to the second one. Then we covered 3 ways the argument is not, but then what is? What is the argument? Okay? Now that's the question. The argument is that there is no philosophical starting point for the atheist to judge what is good or bad objectively. Does this make sense? There's nowhere they can start. There's nowhere they can point to ground objective morality. Belief in God is not necessary for objective moral values and duties. It is not necessary, okay? It is not necessary, right? However, the existence of God is necessary for objective moral values and duties. Is this, oh, yes.
So what is objective?
Yes, yes. So we'll get into that. Is there any questions concerning this? Because this is a very critical point. It's not how we know morality, it's how we ground morality. That is the question. We're not saying that atheists can't be immoral people. Atheists can't be moral people, sorry. Obviously, there are moral atheists, and we can just see that all around. But we are asking a question of moral ontology, not moral epistemology, right? We are asking a question on how to ground morality, not how we know morality. So with that being said, yes, exactly. What does objective or subjective mean? Those are the terms that have been really floating around, right? So what does that mean? First, objective and subjective. And it's critical to understand this difference in order to understand the moral argument. So by objective, we just mean that something is right or wrong, regardless of someone else's opinion. It's something that transcends all cultures, all nations, all societies, and all languages, okay? So something, in this case, morality, right? A moral law that transcends all of these different cultures. By subjective, we just mean that it's based on or influenced by personal opinion, culture, or society. It's basically our opinion, whether it be personal or culturally, that's our opinion, or societally, that's our opinion. Okay? So is this difference, do you understand the difference? Yes.
Could you give an example of subjective?
Yes, we'll get into that, yes. So, for example, let's say that there are, we'll get into examples of both actually, so yes. Let's say that there is 6 people, okay? So now let's say that these 5 guys, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy, they talk amongst one another and determine to steal, what's this guy's name? I guess Bob or something, Jim. Let's call him Jim, okay? They determine to steal Jim's money. So they beat him up and they steal the money. Okay? So, question. Is the 5's actions against the 1 objectively wrong or subjectively wrong? Again, what does objectively mean again? That it is universally wrong regardless of personal or cultural opinion. Right? That's what we just covered, right? Or is it subjectively wrong right or wrong relative to personal or cultural opinion? Does this distinction make sense? Yes. Okay, so we would say objectively wrong, right? But this is a very insignificant and not very helpful example, actually. So, but why do we ask? Why do we say that it is objectively wrong? So before we go on, let's raise the stakes of this example. Okay, let's raise the stakes. Let's extrapolate this principle of objective and subjective morality. Let's raise the stakes to a national level. We just focused on the individual level right now, and I guess if they were a family level. But let's go bigger and let's go nationally. Throughout the Second World War, and even before that, obviously, the Nazis committed crimes against humanity. These photos vividly illustrate the factory-level genocide that took place under their leadership. And you might not be able to see this photo here. This photo here are shoes, okay? Why is there shoes in a Nazi photo? Well, these shoes all represented someone that, what the Nazis would do is before they send them to the firing squad or the gas chambers or the furnaces, they would make all the people strip down so that the next, quote, batch that comes in, they could just reuse the clothes, okay? So they could further the war effort, saving money, okay, to win World War II, okay? So all these individual pairs of shoes represents someone. It represents a soul, right? It represents someone who had dreams and visions and plans and brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, sons and daughters. All the individual pairs of shoes represent someone, right? Does this make sense? It represents someone. So, were the actions of the Nazis objectively wrong? What does that mean again? What does that mean? What does that mean? To say that it was objectively wrong is to say that it was still wrong even though the Nazis thought that it was right. Does this make sense? They think it's right? They want to further the Aryan race and create the ultimate specimen of mankind, right? The Aryan race. And it would, in an objective wrongness, it would still be wrong even if the Nazis had won World War II and either murdered or brainwashed everybody so that everybody believed that what the Nazis did was actually right. On an objective sense, it would still be wrong, okay? Does that make sense? Because it transcends culture, nations, societies, languages, and these type of things, right? So it transcends the Nazis who thought it was right. And it would still be wrong even if they had won World War II. This makes sense, right? Does this make sense? Yes. Okay, great. So, what about the other side? Or were they right or wrong only subjectively? In other words, is it just our opinion that it is wrong, that they were wrong? Is it just from our enlightened American moral values that they were wrong? They were a Western power too, right? They produced some of the greatest musicians and philosophers and artists, and they were a very cultured and, quote, modern society. So is it just our opinion that they are wrong? Is it just from our personal, whether it be personal opinion or cultural opinion or societal opinion that they were wrong? Right? This is the question we're asking. What if they had won World War II? Would it be right then? Because then there's no more disagreement. Does that make sense? If they killed or brainwashed everybody, there would be no more disagreement. Everyone would think that the Holocaust was right. Right? So that would be subjectively wrong. It's just our opinion. Well, whose opinion is superior? In a subjective sense, no one's opinion is. It's just my opinion versus theirs. So, we ask the questions, are the atrocities that the Nazis committed, whether objectively wrong or subjectively wrong? Obviously, we would say objectively, right? Obviously. Right? And even those who are forced to say that it is only subjectively wrong because of their worldview, what their worldview entails. Even those who are forced to say that it is only subjectively wrong don't actually believe that. Here's why. Imagine I'm sitting in a subway, okay? And a guy walks in who believes that morality is just subjective. It's just my opinion or cultural opinion or societal opinion that something is wrong, okay? Everyone get the scenario over here, right? We are sitting in a subway. This guy walks in, okay? Imagine I go up to him and I punch him, okay? What is his natural reaction? He would get up and say, "Why did you do that? Your actions are wrong." Does that make sense? You would know that he does not believe in subjective morality by his reactions. Does that make sense? By his reaction, you can tell that this guy does not believe in subjective morality. Because what if I felt good about punching it, right? Whose opinion is superior? But notice that he appeals to a higher moral law that is universal, right? Say I come from a different culture, and he comes from another culture, right? He would still object that something is not right. He would appeal to a higher standard of morality. Does this make sense? So even those who quote unquote believe that there is only subjective morality don't actually believe that when you understand their reactions to what you just did. Right? And the Nazis, what they did is on a level so much greater than just that minor harm that I did, right? Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. So, of course, when we look upon the horrific genocide of the Nazis, and there's more examples, obviously, but we'll just stick to this example. Our moral compass tells us that something is objectively wrong. It doesn't just tell us, actually. It screams at us that something is objectively wrong, right? It practically screams at us. Excuse me, sorry. Okay. So we have established that there is an objective morality. But how would a non-theist, and there are many non-theists, right, like Buddhists or, I don't know, some nomadic tribe or something, or atheists obviously fit into that category. How would a non-theist try to ground objective morality, objective moral values and duties? How would they try to ground this? Well, what about trying to ground morality, objective morality, in things like what promotes, wait for the sun, what promotes the well-being of conscious creatures through science? What if we tried to ground objective morality in something like that, on the atheistic view? Something that promotes the well-being of conscious creatures through science. Okay? This is confronted by an immediate problem. This hypothesis, in fact. It's confronted by an immediate problem. Science is morally neutral. It doesn't tell you, it only tells you what is, not what you ought to do with it. And this distinction is called the is-ought distinction in moral philosophy. And this distinction is critical, okay? It only tells you the facts of what that thing does, what that material object does, right? It doesn't tell you what you should or ought to do with that thing. Does this make sense? The is-ought distinction. Is this point clear? Yes. Okay, great. For example, take a nuclear bomb. Science can tell you what that thing does. I don't know exactly how it works, but it's something like uranium is getting crushed at such rapid and powerful force that it explodes outwards, right, in tremendous energy and force. Something like that. So science can tell you what that thing does. Does this make sense? It can tell you the resulting effects if it hits land or if it hits human beings, what it does, right? You evaporate, right? What this thing does. But what it doesn't tell you is if you should use it or not, or you have to use it or not. Does this make sense? It doesn't tell you that you ought to use this. Scientists can do that because they are moral agents, but science by itself does not tell you if you should use it or not. The is-ought distinction, remember. Does this make sense? Great. Okay. So this is the is-ought distinction in moral philosophy, and it's critical. So it would follow immediately that objective moral values and duties cannot exist on a purely atheistic worldview. Right? Case in point, Richard Dawkins states, a famous atheist, "There is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. We are machines for propagating DNA. It is every living object's sole reason for being." Another atheist, a more scholarly atheist, says, if the slide will show, yes, hallelujah. Michael Roos, he states, he's also a moral philosopher. He states, "Morality is a biological adaptation, no less than our hands and feet and teeth. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory." So on the atheistic view, we are just animals for propagating DNA and have no moral obligations to one another. On this view, although actions like rape or murder are not societally advantageous, it has no basis to show that rape or murder is objectively wrong. Does that make sense? It has no basis, right? In fact, rape and murder goes on all the time in the animal kingdom. The rapist who goes against the social norm is doing nothing more seriously than acting unfavorably. Again, it's just your opinion versus theirs, right? And I did not make that slide, okay? It's not me who made that slide. There was someone else who helped me on this, and they made that slide, okay? So I don't take credit for that slide. But, so on the atheistic framework, as we are just amoral animals, there's nothing objectively wrong with lying, stealing, cheating, coveting, injustice, robbery, racism, adultery, abuse, beating, betrayal, rape, murder, slavery, child sex trafficking, abortion, genocide, ethnic cleansing, mass starvation, holocausts, and etc. On atheism, again, since there is no objective moral foundation, there's nothing objectively wrong with all of these. It's just, again, it's just your opinion versus theirs. Does this make sense? Again, those are the pairs of shoes. But as we've seen in the previous slides, objective moral values and duties clearly do exist. Philosophers who reflect upon our moral senses argue that just as I believe my five senses, senses such as like sight or smell or taste and things like that, okay? Just as I intuitively believe those senses, we should similarly believe those moral senses that we have, namely that something is right or wrong, good or evil. Does this make sense? Any reason that we have to distrust those senses must be exceedingly powerful to override that initial belief. Does that make sense? For example, let's take sight, for example. You must have a really good reason to distrust your senses, right? Your sight or your smell or touch or something like that. You must have a good overriding reason that is exceptionally powerful to have doubts about your sight, right? Similarly, we should trust our moral intuitions as reliable. Again, any challenge to this view would need to prove that our moral experience is completely unreliable. However, as we've seen in previous slides, our moral sense and compass is so strong that any such challenge would need to be exceptionally powerful to override our direct moral experience. Okay, so we have seen that objective morality cannot exist on a purely atheistic worldview or framework. You see the pyramid collapsing there. So what could this foundation be in order to ground objective morality? Well, first, this foundation must be something that is eternal or non-temporal, something that transcends time, okay? Something that is eternal in nature. This is because the objective moral law transcends culture, societal norms, and personal opinion, but is somehow binding to all cultures and societies and languages. Does that make sense? It transcends those kind of things. So this objective foundation has to be eternal or non-temporal. If it is eternal, that means it does not have a beginning. It cannot have a beginning. Does that make sense? Because it existed forever. It means that it is uncaused or necessary. It is not contingent. Okay? Thus, it must also be necessary. Yeah. Further, this foundation for objective morality must be something that is personal. Why? Personal just means like it has agency or it has it has freedom of the will, right? It has it's something that bears semblance to characteristics like ours, right? Why? Why? That's the question. Why? Think about qualities such as patience, love, justice, and courage. So think of qualities that only belong to persons, okay? So these qualities, kind of like patience, love, justice, courage, mercy, happiness, and others, right? There's many others. Okay, do these characteristics exist in material objects? For example, do they exist in cups or rocks or tables? Does it make sense for someone to say that a table is courageous, or a rock is just, or a cup is patient? It makes no sense, right? Or does it make sense for a speaker to be loving? It makes no sense, right? What do these kind of characteristics exist in? If we think about it, these kind of moral characteristics only exist in persons or something that is personal, that bears these kinds of characteristics of morality. For example, you can say that a person is courageous, loving, and patient. You can't say the same thing for a rock, right? You can't say a rock is loving or courageous or patient. These kinds of moral characteristics only belong in persons. Does this make sense? Yes, great. It is only something that is something personal that bears these kinds of characteristics. Like this handsome man right here. Something that is personal, okay? But although he may disagree, Victor may disagree, the reality is that no finite person has actualized all moral value. Does that make sense? There's no one who achieved the height of moral perfection. I know in our doctrine we will say that, but in just the question, does God exist, okay? There is no one who has reached the height of perfection or all moral value. The moral ideal is nowhere fully actualized in the finite world, while still being binding in the finite world. But how can something be objective and valid if it does not exist? Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. Come on. Okay, yes. So we have seen that objective morality must be grounded in something that is eternal, necessary, and personal. Right? We concluded that, right? Yes. If the moral ideal is to be valid for reality, it must be fully realized in an existent that is eternal, necessary, and personal. Again, what kind of criteria, what kind of thing fits into that criteria? It needs to be something that is personal. For example, again, mathematics, numbers are eternal and necessary, but they're not personal, right? They don't have moral agency. They can't, for example, you can't say the number 9 is courageous or loving, right? So only something like an immaterial mind that transcends both time and space fits into that kind of criteria. That is God, right? What we traditionally attribute as an immaterial mind. So that is the third argument for God's existence, the moral argument, arguing that because there's an objective foundation because there's objective morality, there must be some kind of foundation that undergirds that objective morality. So, conclusion. Today we first saw that the universe began to exist. And how did we see that? We saw that through, number 1, a philosophical argument that an infinite number of past events is not possible. Right? That was the first reason. The second reason was that the universe is expanding, a scientific argument. And thirdly, the second law, the SLT. That proved that the universe had to begin to exist because it has a limited number of life. So from this, we concluded, this conclusion that the universe began to exist, that whatever created the universe had to be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused or necessary, powerful, and personal, what we call God. Then we took a look at the fine-tuning argument and concluded that because there is fine-tuning in the universe, there must be a fine-tuner. Finally, we deduced that the existence of God is necessary for the objective standard for morality, something that is, again, necessary, eternal, or non-temporal, and personal, right? Although each of these are standalone arguments, when combined, they give the full picture of God reflected in classical theism. That is something that is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, necessary, personal, supremely powerful, supremely intelligent, and the moral foundation of the universe. Right? It gives the full picture of classical theism. That makes sense, right? Yes. So, therefore, with these 3 brief arguments, I believe that there is good reasons to believe and think that God exists. Thank you very much. So, questions. So, before I go on to questions, I understand that, I want to say this first. I understand that today's lecture may have been complicated or confusing, and maybe you didn't understand a lot what we were saying. But I want to say that that is okay, okay? That's okay. When I first encountered these kind of arguments, it went right over my head too. So it's okay if you don't understand all the arguments. But I want to emphasize that it is still good progress for our lives, right? Just knowing that there's good reasons to believe in God, it's not just like a caveman belief, right? Popular culture portrays belief in God as a caveman belief, where we were just banging sticks and rocks together and came up with the idea of God. Or it portrays the belief as a desert-dwelling, nomadic, stupid belief. Now that we have, quote, transcended that and we are now modern and scientific, therefore, there's no good reason to believe in God. That's how popular culture portrays belief in God. Right? But there is really good reasons to believe in God. And just doing a little bit of research, you can know that there's very good reasons for belief in God through high-level philosophers or scientists and logicians and mathematicians. There's brilliant people who believe in God, right? It's not just a retarded, desert-dwelling, caveman, I can't think of any other adjective. Belief. It's not just a retarded belief, okay? So with that being said, are there any questions related? You can ask any question, okay? Don't ask like, do you like turtles or something? But something that is related to the presentation, okay? And it doesn't have to be just generic theism. It can be Christianity or unification thought, things like that. But I want to emphasize that I obviously do not know everything, okay? I obviously don't know everything. So I will try to answer with the best of my ability, but obviously I'm not omniscient. So yes, please understand that. And you can ask a question, again, whether through this QR code that you want to ask the question, or let me do this. There's also a link up there if you want to enter the link manually into your browser, Chrome, Safari, Brave, or whatever. You can enter that in. You can scan that QR code. Or if you want to, you can just raise your hand and yeah. But if you're going to ask a question through the QR code and you want to ask it anonymously, please select the anonymous button if you don't want to reveal yourself, okay? There has been instances where they didn't click the anonymous button. So yes, so if you want to ask it anonymously, you have to select that button, okay? Yes, okay. So we can take like a 2-minute break if there's no other immediate questions right now. We can take a break for 5 minutes, and then you can enter in your questions or yeah, things like that. Take a bathroom break or whatever. So I want to break for 5 minutes, and then let's get back here before lunch. Yes, thank you.